Hey everybody, Jess Intuitive Angel Healer here with your Grounded. Thank you so much for joining our podcast today and welcome to another episode of Dancing in the Toxic Shadows, Finding Empowerment and Hope Through the Toxicity. This is a podcast that features an empowered soul swim through the toxic waters of life and how they have found the courage, strength, and blind faith used to obtain the life that they truly want to live, and how they encourage others to take that same leap of faith, no matter if they can only see the first two steps or not. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Michele Finnernan from Florida. Hi, how are you
Hi,
today?
I'm doing good, Jess. How are you?
I am doing very well. It is Friday and it's an awesome day. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. Now, you are a licensed psychotherapist?
I am a licensed psychotherapist in the Coral Springs, Florida area. I have my own business called Beck and Associates. I have been in the mental health field for about 20 years. 10 of those years were doing community mental health, and 10 of those years have been in my own private practice.
That is awesome. That is why I'm so excited to have you here, because you share a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is domestic abuse. And you've actually created a book, which is a guide for service professionals. And we had talked a little bit before you came on the show here about how this book is perfect, especially for what's going on in the world right now, because a lot of people don't understand. People aren't always being non-compliant. Sometimes people are having their own mental health crisis in their head, and you're making it worse, but people don't see that because you can't see what's going on in someone's mind. But it
Right.
is very good to bring out awareness on this subject.
This book came about when I was in about 2005, 2007. I worked for a local jail. And in this local jail, I was a group facilitator for domestic violence, anger management, and conflict resolution inmate incarcerated women in their unit. And so I was working one-on-one and in a group setting with incarcerated women in Florida. And what I was finding out, the more I did group and the more people, individuals, females would share their story, I began to realize that a lot of these women were incarcerated for domestic abuse, for defending themselves in a domestic abuse relationship, and they were actually victims. So I was finding out what was uncovering in front of me is a lot of these women that were incarcerated were actually victims
Yes.
of domestic abuse. So I thought the first thing I was absolutely floored by that, and understanding that something is wrong here, like something is flawed in the systematic structure of how things are working. And so I was in my PhD program working really closely on discovering a topic of which to do for my dissertation, and working closely with my chair and my committee on formulating some of the ideas for the study. The book actually that has been published by Routledge Taylor and Francis Company in the UK is actually an academic book. So it's not really like my personal viewpoint. It's very research driven oriented kind of book. And what I decided to do within the book is really research survivors of domestic abuse who have been out of a domestic abuse relationship for a year or more, but have experienced either physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, and trauma. And I interviewed these survivors, 90-minute interviews. And what I began to understand is I wanted to see how the system could improve through a survivor's eyes.
Yes.
So I really looked at, and when I talked with the survivors, I asked ways in which they utilize either law enforcement or counseling or shelters, clergy, talked a little bit about the judicial system, attorneys, and how not only formal supports help them, but also, or not help them, but also informal supports, their family, their parents, their relatives, their friends, their coworkers, their supervisors, their employers. So I looked at both formal, the professionals, and informal, the family and friends. And I really dissected what worked for a lot of these people, for a lot of these survivors, and what did not work. And some of these things were just, it was almost like when I was collecting the data and I was analyzing the data, a lot of things kind of just popped out that were being said by almost all the survivors. And I found that to be extremely time telling, that they were saying pretty much the same things.
Yes. And I am so happy that you came up with a book like this, because unfortunately witnessed firsthand how an abuser can get in and manipulate everyone around you. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Gothica, but that one really strikes a nerve with me. It's got Halle Berry, and she was married to a doctor who was a psychotherapist in a mental hospital. They ended up getting her locked up and told her she was crazy. And
Yeah.
it was his plot. And I had something similar like that happen when my world came tumbling down. And I know that those women, I feel so bad for, and you know what, is that those abusers got in their heads so bad that now they're doing time for something that they shouldn't even be time. And that's like a double insult to
Right.
being abused, but you'll never know that from these women because they'll never talk about it. But I think it's amazing that you took the time to actually, dissect that and go, what is the shared, the commonality here that everyone has? And I think that's amazing that you pulled that out, because it's all about training. We would have a lot less problems if people knew what was going on, and the abuse a lot of people don't even know they're being abused when it's happening.
That's exactly that. You hit a cornerstone as to, seeking help. A lot of people, a lot of victims don't even realize that they're experiencing the abuse. So that goes kind of untapped. It's, they don't coin it as abuse. And a lot of these providers, law enforcement, counselors, they ask the question that needs to be stopped asking to these victims and survivors is, why don't you just leave? That's such a loaded question, and it's so like, it's if you had one answer to justify it, then it would be easy. But because there's such a psychological component as to why these victims or survivors couldn't leave or didn't feel comfortable leaving on so many different levels, that question just should be asked. It's like almost like it's such a complex answer to actually give. It sounds kind of like it should equate to a simple answer when there's so many components and factors that lie with that answer for victims and survivors.
And people, if you want to know from a person who didn't leave many toxic relationships, when they get in your brain that much, you can leave all you want. You can be 5,000 miles away from your abuser, but if you haven't cut the telephone off in your head for them to pick up, guess what? You're going to be ruining your new spot with your old stuff. And then they're going to come in, and then you're going to see, that's why you see that girl with the guy that beat him up, a couple weeks ago, holding hands in the park, eating a hot dog together, because that's how the abuse. I've learned a lot on my own journey here. And, I watched it from my mom too. And I've noticed that it's a whole, like, you don't bring awareness. They say the first thing healing is awareness, because that's what I noticed. I was like, why was I so dumb? All of us think this. Why was I so dumb and I stayed there for so long? You weren't dumb. You just weren't aware that it wasn't
Right.
normal, because you were groomed to think that this environment of loneliness and being solo by yourself and nobody liking you, that is a good way for somebody to take control of you, but you don't see it as that way. They call it love.
Yes. Well, this is something that I bring up in the book in terms of the families and the support. You bring up a very interesting point in terms of describing your own experience. That's actually called intergenerational learned trauma, learned abuse, learned victimization, and the correlation that daughters have with their mothers and that relationship, and how important a mother-daughter relationship is in terms of not for the daughter to seek out an intimate partner relationship is absolutely time telling. When I interviewed these survivors, they had all of them that I interviewed had such a emotionally detached relationship with their mother. And that is something, and where they've learned the victimization from just the mother being a victim. So that's that relationship, that mother-daughter relationship. And mothers can be like physically there, financially there, but if there's not an emotional bonding and attachment, the daughters seek out a distorted kind of traumatic bonding with an intimate partner relationship.
That is very true. And most mothers in that cycle were the victims themselves, and they never fully healed it. This is what I've seen on my journey, is that you never healed it, and then you shared that down to your daughter. And that's why when this understanding, the little puzzle pieces finally came in my brain, I was like, no way am I going to pass this down to my daughter. No, I'll keep my mental health struggles mine and not share all this generational brokenness that we pass down, because it's a learned habit. I have a lot of clients when I read cards. Sometimes, I'm just the messenger, and I have one and it says family history. When I was a new reader, I had to break it to someone that had to do with your parents, and that's why your relationships are this way. And they got very angry at me because they said their mother was, perfect and their dad was perfect. And I was like, well, something's not right. Somebody's not giving some kind of good love, because we really don't understand. We normalize it. It's just crazy how much in the world we normalize. And that's why sometimes we don't always see eye to eye, because really we're all in a lot of the same things. They just look a little different.
Absolutely.
When you come down at the end of it, we're all going through the same thing. It's just nuts. Now, what was your inspiration for getting in this field of psychotherapy and working? Because, it takes a special person. I was a CNA and a medical assistant, and working, especially with trauma, it takes a very special person to have that kindness, but to have, you got to help them, but you got to be kind about it too. So how did your journey look getting into this field?
That's a very good question. I did a little bit of like brainstorming and thinking about it. Really happened very, very early on in my life. I want to say elementary, middle school, when I was indirectly exposed to trauma, when in terms of my family dynamic, my father had an extremely toxic and abusive household. He had witnessed domestic violence. He was a product of a child and adult being a victim of abuse by his father. When he was kind of like not knowing who to turn to, he turned to me at a too young of an age, and really was quite descriptive and detailed about his abuse. At the time, I didn't have the techniques or the skills to kind of help him, but I was always like showing compassion and love and just an empathetic ear to him. But that is called intergenerational transmission of trauma, is I was experiencing through him his trauma, and it was indirectly impacting me at such a young age. And when I realized this, I realized that, later on in my life, this is probably one of the reasons why and no mistake why I became an individual therapist, a marriage therapist, a family therapist. It's not, there's no mistake as to understanding why I got my PhD in conflict resolution and dispute analysis. There's absolutely no error in that. It was kind of a line for me at a very young age, and experiencing kind of indirectly his trauma, and at a very young age, too young, like I said, to be disclosing that type of abuse and trauma. But because I loved my father and wanted to be there for him, I listened with an open heart. I gave him compassion and love. And I think as a therapist, you have to have that for your clients, but you also have to have the skills in order to problem solve, in order to become resolution focused, solution focused. So it's a combination of not just having empathy and unconditional positive regard for your clients, but also like guiding them, setting up a strategy, setting up a plan where they're making progress. So it happened for me becoming a psychotherapist relatively early on, not really knowing until I became in my graduate program that this is one of the main reasons why I became a therapist.
That's awesome though. I love the inspiration behind, why people get in the medical field. I got into it in 2008 when my grandma died from pneumonia, and simply because nobody told me about how sick she was. So I was devastated when she died of pneumonia, and for some reason I took guilt on for it. Like it was my fault. Because she would have just passed away. She didn't have to die of pneumonia, and that just made me sad. And she was all by herself. So it drove me to really get in the medical field, because I did sales 10 years before that. And so it's kind of fun that I've taken this journey, and now here I am, a spiritual grounding coach. And I really do believe that when you are doing therapy, not to just have the empathy, because that's one thing I try to do is have the empathy, but to make sure we have something that we're working on. You don't have to put a time on healing, but you need to put some kind of structure around it, or you'll just get stuck in the Sally sad pits, and those are the hard ones. That's where you need the empathy to move past it. I like your style. See the kind empathy with you, and I really like how I love your whole mission of what you're doing here.
So Jess, another thing as a therapist that I have learned for just channeling in terms of my own spirituality, and my own faith, is channeling that universal God, Jesus, whatever you believe in, and really like channeling that and able to work through that with your clients, and actually having that being channeled through me. Because sometimes when I have a session and I give the feedback and the input, I look around like, how did that even come about? So I mean, I kind of at times shock myself as to where did this come from. So I think that channeling my spirituality for my clients and really assessing nonverbal, verbal, what they're going through is a really has been helping me throughout my journey as a therapist, helping individuals, families, and couples.
That's awesome. And that's funny, because that is why I like being a spiritual grounding coach, because that's what makes my coaching different than, regulars, because I say some stuff and I even surprise myself, like, wow, that was pretty good advice. How'd you even get that? And it's always spot on, but I love it because we don't have to dance around the subject. There's no, like, everybody knows when they come, they might as well be honest, because if not, you're only arguing with yourself, because at this point, spirit, when they deliver the message, it's always spot on, because it depends if that person wants to really admit it or not. But either way, I always say I'm the message, and here's your message, but I'm going to help you work through it, because some messages are hard. And going on a self-care journey, I thought I had it all together in my 30s. when I was with my ex, I was married for 10 years. I thought I was doing awesome. Went to school, got the career, and then my life all fell down because I forgot to heal all those things. So that's why I always urge people to please stand up to your demons. They're not fun. But if
Mhm.
you do it, you won't have to redo it later on in life because you only have to do it
Absolutely.
once, which is
Absolutely. Because I do find that if you don't address them, it will resurface and manifest in other ways.
yes.
You're gonna have to eventually deal with it, whether it be in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 70s. It's going to resurface its ugly head. So
Yes.
take care of it now, work through the process, and working through challenging times and difficult times should not be method to back down from it. Let's work through these things. Let's
Yes.
see ourselves on the other side of it. Let's look back and reflect from it and learn and grow. That's how growth happens. That's how emotional, physical, spiritual, development happens. So that's an important piece of that puzzle.
Very true. And nothing lasts forever. If you can always remember that, you'll keep on going.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, I am very big on self care because that's the one thing I lacked for many years. That is an important element to keep you not falling back in toxic patterns because you can heal them. But if you don't have, a structure to go on to, you're going to fall back into those. What do you do for self care for yourself? How do you promote self care within your patients?
For me, I just started becoming a little bit more. I'm always kind of tweaking things in my life to promote my self-care. So I've just started with a family member, my brother, who has helped me through trying some different things that I could be doing to kind of improve my own health, my own mental health, and my own spiritual health. So I start off the morning. How it's been working out as of late is I start off the morning relatively early, around 6 or 7, and I either go for an hour walk or I go for a half an hour walk, depending on my time. So I don't listen to anything. I don't take the phone. I time it where I am just one with nature. I am one, the moon is out. So I feel like a universal connection there. And I really just kind of take that walk to kind of clear my head. I clear my head through that walk. It's nothing cardiovascular like my crazy, but I go through with a brisk walk just to get me moving and get me cleared. And then I come back and what I've started doing, which has been super helpful for me, is a 30-minute session of yoga. I have a
Yes.
yoga mat. I do a 30-minute session of yoga. I have a lot of, I'm very arthritic. I've been diagnosed with sciatica. I actually have an artificial right hip. It's been a little bit of a struggle, to do the yoga, but I am working through the pain. I'm working through the stretches, and it makes me feel the soreness and the pain that I feel from it makes me feel like I'm actually doing something. So that's something that I've been implementing. Another thing that I've been implementing is at night when I'm done with my sessions, I do a 20-minute kind of deep breathing exercises, a guided deep breathing meditation exercise, really focusing on my breath, releasing all the stress, inhaling relaxation, and just having that component in my life has helped me. I've been doing this routine for about a week, and I have to tell you, I feel absolutely amazing. Also, what I've been doing is I also tweak often my diet. So I am, what really like makes me feel super sluggish and really lethargic is the sweets, the sugars, and the carbs. So
Yes.
I really been focusing in on hydration. I've really been focused on moderate eating and only like eating my big meal in the afternoon and a very small meal in the evening time between clients. So I'm always tweaking. I'm always trying to figure out what I can do personally to make me feel better, to be an effective, person to other people in life. how I promote self-care is I encourage people because of the pandemic and everything that has been going on since March have really lost a sense of their basic needs are not getting met. People are not on sleep schedules. People are not monitoring their eating. People are not moving as much, so I'm really encouraging people to get on a routine, to get in some type of structure. Their sleep hygiene's completely off. So getting some type of structure where you are monitoring your eating, you're really scaling back and really fueling your body with things that are going to bring you energy and not deplete you. I'm really focusing on, shutting off the technology an hour and a half before you go to bed and really like having some just alone time. And this is the hardest thing for clients, is sitting alone with themselves. That's also very important, shutting off the technology and getting into a sleep cycle where you're not up 3 o'clock in the morning and up, getting up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So that is something that I'm trying to promote. And people have pretty much lost those types of basic things that we normally wouldn't have lost because of things that have transpired this past year. It's just reteaching, re-engaging, promoting the structure, promoting how important your self-care is, especially during this time.
Yes.
Because this is something, what we're experiencing right now is a pretty big storm. And if we don't take care of self, we'll be engulfed in that storm.
So true. And taking care of yourself, I never really realized how much your food and what you watch and what you take in, what you consume in your body every day. If you see somebody walking around really angry and just mad at the world, I wonder what they watch, what they eat, and also can they breathe? Because I've noticed a lot of angry people, including my family members, can't breathe. They have a blockage up here. And I've noticed a lot of people, we forget to take time to breathe. You need to
Absolutely
let all that airflow in there.
let it out.
And you also need to journal your thoughts. Stop bottling everything in there, because if you can't sit by yourself, I always tell people, if you can't sit by yourself and be okay, then you are never going to be okay with anybody else, because you got to be all right with yourself first. Because people are like, I'll leave you alone. I'm like, please. I love being alone by myself. I don't like being lonely, but you can put me in a room and I guarantee come back the next day, I won't be bored, because I'll figure out something, because maybe I've been alone enough that I've sat in the darkness, that, it's an exhilarating feeling to sit in the darkness. And I finally did that in 2017, where I was like, here we are, and we're just gonna, see everything. An interesting tip about your midlife crisis in your 40s that you might find interesting is I was reading a book about shadow work. Now, shadow work is all the collective hurts and pains and just negative emotions and feelings that you've ever experienced in your life that you never stood up to. So you're like, oh, somebody called you fat. And you're like, oh, push that down, So what happens when you don't deal with all these things? That's called your shadow side. And your shadow side comes back in your mid 30s, 40s, like a boomerang. And depending on how much you stuffed in there is how big your midlife crisis is. So I noticed, I never knew that little fun fact was because of our shadow side. So if you ever wonder why they say you have a midlife crisis, because that's about how long it takes for your shadow side to creep back in and then just ruin your whole everything. How has working with survivors of the toxic shadows impacted your journey as an educator and provider? Do you think it has made you a better provider?
I mean, Jess, when I was able to have the privilege, and it really was a privilege to interview these survivors, it was so amazing for me on so many different levels that the interviews that I had really just opened my eyes to some of the struggles that a lot of these women were experiencing. And it really shed light on that, women are, particularly women are they can very much be interconnected because they have this, like you said, this kind of like similar stories, but different, but on the same theme. And it just really helps me to really focus in on, relationships and how to have a healthy relationship and what to look for in terms when relationships aren't healthy, and how to identify some things that are toxic or abusive, and how to really work in your relationships and in past relationships, what those relationships and dynamics look like. So it really brought it was the hardest, doing the dissertation and turning the dissertation into an actual book on, on Amazon has been transformative for me as a person going through this journey and experiencing some of this trauma through the survivor's eyes was just absolutely riveting for me. And probably the hardest thing I ever had to do academically. I've been in school for a very long time, bachelor's, master's, PhD. I mean, very long time. The hardest thing to do was to put together the dissertation, because you don't have like a structured class to do it. You're pretty much on your own with your committee, and you have to engage in self-discipline. And transforming the dissertation into the book has been just a process I've always wanted to do. I couldn't let go of it. I always wanted to get this information out, and I couldn't let go of it, and I just didn't. And I stuck with it. I got a proposal through Routledge, Taylor and Francis, which is a very reputable academic journal and publishing company. And they pitched my proposal to them. They absolutely tweaked it. They gave me some feedback. We went back and forth with everything, and it just skyrocketed. It just blossomed into this manifestation of a piece that I'm so very proud of. And I'm very happy that it transpired into the way that it looks. The book is very organized. It's very systematic. There's graphs in it. It's very research oriented, but it sheds a lot of light on what survivors go through and how the system can work and how it doesn't work, and what are some things systematically that we can do to make those improvements in order to serve the best we can this specific population.
And I love that you do this, because it is so needed. And I really didn't pay attention to how many resources we lack in this world until I found myself displaced out of my home, because that's what happens when you are walking away from a marriage. More than likely you're going to be homeless. Well, guess what? In Colorado, for some odd reason, there is no women's shelter. That is right.
Wow.
There is not a woman's shelter. It is the homeless shelter. And this girl had to go take herself to the homeless shelter, because I was currently working at a doctor's office and I needed somewhere to sleep and take a shower, because I couldn't have anybody know what was going on. And it really was very humiliating. And I actually had the guard come in, because he was kicking out some homeless lady, and he was a young 20-year-old, and he started flexing on me. He turned around and was like doing the whole, what are you looking at? I was like, first of all, I am not in prison, and you are not like the prison guard. But he started talking to me like I was an inmate and told me to shut up and this and that. He told me all these things, and I was just like, you're lucky. I really want to live. I need somewhere to stay, because that's what they do to get you kicked out, but it's crazy that there's no women's shelter. They have Tessa here. But I really am bringing this up because I really am thinking of some way to get this. We need a woman's shelter, okay? Because when you're a woman displaced out of abuse versus someone, both ways are bad, okay? But being homeless versus someone a victim of domestic violence and abuse and all this, it would just blew my mind when they're like, no, ma'am, there is, you would have to go to Denver. And then the women's shelter they have is the living program. They have that, which is Tessa. So you can live there, but you have to also, do a bunch of things. But it blew my mind. There's no women's shelter. They used to have a women's shelter, and somehow it got taken away. So I would just like to bring up this point. So,
well, back in the day, Jess, they started off with animal shelters first.
Wow.
They started having animal shelters, and then that was first. Wow. And
I guess it's not that bad.
Right, but and then they realized, as years transgress, we really need to really focus in on women and families, and maybe develop like the dog shelter, like a woman's shelter for them to escape their lives and their homes. The resources, right now, since the pandemic, domestic violence is definitely on the rise. Domestic abuse is actually, at the forefront here, along with substance abuse and suicide. And the resources are busting at the seams. There's not enough of resources. There's not enough placement. There's not enough good providers. Law enforcement aren't really educated to deal with this type of population. They're not criminals. And a lot of times law enforcement treats a call, regardless of what call, and domestic violence calls are the most dangerous for police officers to go to, but they treat a lot of the times the victims in these calls as criminals. And a lot of training, empathy training, sensitivity training really needs to happen for law enforcement to serve appropriately this population, because they're not criminals, and they're getting re-victimized. What you experienced with being in that shelter and having that guard flex that's a re-traumatization of what you've been through.
You just treated me like a regular homeless person. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's just crazy. Like, I'm not a piece of scum. I'm actually going to your doctor's office. Hey, I might even see you as a patient next week. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's just crazy. You should really learn how to treat people. And I really have a big problem when you're in a professional position and you, that's almost like I've got the power. And that's where the victimization comes at you. But
you're absolutely right. And it's so interesting that's why this book is so imperative, is to help not only the victim and the survivors, but also the people that are serving this population not to unintentionally or intentionally re-victimize. So that is so important for law enforcement to know this, for therapists to know this, for medical practitioners to understand this, for clergy to help, in a way that's actually benefiting the survivor or the victim.
And sometimes people just need time to cool down. I notice people want answers and they ask you 20 million questions when you're in the middle of, like I said, having a mental health crisis. I understand why people are yelling at you and you're not getting the answers you want, because people can't be patient. There was a poll a long time ago. I did this video about time, and I read this article about time, and it was going through all these victims of abuse and domestic abuse and stuff. And they wanted to know what the commonality was between all of them, and it was time. They never felt like they had enough time. And they always, if you pushed them and told them to hurry up, they got stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like it's another thing for some reason, when you're in an abusive relationship, that person is always telling you, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, go, go, go. And you're just like, what are we on? A track team? Where we gotta go? That's so important. It's hurry up, hurry up. And so I've noticed that as part of my trauma. I have to do everything methodically. I have to get my keys. I have to go almost, in a circle and get all my stuff to leave. Now, if you get in the middle of that and tell me hurry up, you're going to get 5 blocks down the street and have to come back and get my phone or get my something because it's weird. It's something. but people wouldn't know that unless you were, people just need to learn that everybody's going through something, and we need to be a little kinder.
Absolutely.
And people that often come up in front of you, I always say, are a direct reflection of your shadow side if they're not nice. So that's what really helped me change my attitude too, and learn that, even though I was a victim in some things, I'm not a victim in everything. And some of the things is my attitude recreating all this energy right in front of me. And that's when I learned to really, I don't want it no more. And all I got to do is heal. I will heal, because I don't want these jerk faces in front of me anymore.
So what it is, Jess, is really for a lot of these women is, you don't, just because you have been victims doesn't mean you have to have that victim mentality. You take back your power. You take that restorative power. Everyone has it in them. Every woman or man has it in them. Some people just it goes left untapped. So it's tapping into that empowerment that you have within yourself, and really realizing that you don't have to be in your own way in terms of a mentality. You can break through, you can go through adverse times and really grow from it on the other side of it. So it's really in your own power that you have innately in yourself, tapping into, recognizing, and then transforming it for yourself, so you don't have the victim takeaway mentality.
Yes. And I love it, because, that was the one point, that's where my healing started, is when I finally got my brain around that whole statement that you said. I finally took back my power from all these people and learned how to start standing up for myself. So
that's awesome.
I'm so happy. Thank you. I'm so happy that we have women like ourselves out there. And that's what I push every day, to do something with my, I created this Toxic Shadows podcast because I want people to know that you are not your trauma. I tell people that all the time.
Absolutely.
I don't care what happened to you in the past. You are not your trauma, and you don't have to feel bad, because you know what? You had to go through that to learn. But once you learn, that's the kicker, is you'll never have to go through it again. So if once I learned that, I was like, cool, as long as I don't have to go through it 50 times, because I'm tired of going through it. But if I have to stand up and learn, it's like a test. And if I win it, then I don't ever have to take that test again. I will do it. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Your platform is so important for just to get out the education and the awareness, and to know that, hey, you're not alone in the struggle. You're not alone here. And, people go through struggles, and that's where you learn the most about yourself, is when you're going through the struggle. And to know that this platform that you have with working in the toxic shadows of the relationship and the toxicity in these relationships, letting women know, number one, you're not alone in the struggle.
Yes.
That's huge. That's a huge takeaway for a lot of these women.
Yes. And that is totally why I came on here. And I also bring guests of all different kinds of origins, genres, because I want you to know it's not just because you're in poverty. It's not. There's very many rich, successful women that have been living in the shadows of abuse. You are seeing them pop up on the news all the time because they've been trained. I watched something about the yoga. There's on Netflix. There's a Bikram yoga. And in the 90s, when that was the only option, because he came from India, actually he stole some other guru's stuff, came here, impersonated that guru stuff as his, and got all these women. Now the Bikram yoga studios, he basically had over 100 women in this. They had to work out together and learn how to be instructors. So you had to do everything, because if you didn't have his backing, guess what? You couldn't have a yoga studio, because that's how there's like only one kind of yoga back then. It was the hot yoga. And he was doing all these horrible things to all these women, and like having movie night and having them come rub his feet, and just all this terrible, like it was even worse than that, but that's just one instance. And all these women were on there, and they sucked it up, because in California, they wanted their yoga studio. and they had to go through all this traumatization and abuse. And some of them, most of them actually got their yoga studio, but it didn't come out till now. And I'm so thankful that they're finally taking back their power and speaking up. But the whole point of my story is to let people know it's not because of an environment, because of money. People think, some people still have the thinking, oh, this only happens to, poor people. No, it
Right.
happens to all of us. And you know what?
Yeah.
Don't feel ashamed. You're no more worse of a person. We don't have to feel different. And I know people with money feel even more ashamed of this because that kind of stuff is definitely not talked about. But that's why I brought this out here, is to let everybody know abuse is abuse, verbal, mental, sexual, and we don't have to put up with it anymore. And if you're putting up with it, I'm here to give you permission to say you don't have to put up with it anymore. Where can our guest go ahead and reach out to you if they would like to connect with you or get you on an interview for their show?
I am on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I have my own website. How you can find me on Instagram is my company is Beck and Associates. And there is actually a place on the website that you can reach out to me, that you can connect with me, that you can set up an appointment that you want to talk to me about being on a podcast or on an interview of some sort. So there's a platform in terms of my website, Beck and Associates, V as in Victor, ECC and Associates. And then on Facebook, it's again, Dr. Finneran.
Awesome. And we're going to have all the links to your stuff at the bottom as well. And the link to her book, first edition, Surviving Domestic Abuse, Formal and Informal Supports and Services, which is available now on Amazon. The link is also at the bottom. What are some final thoughts you would like to share with our audience as we end this amazing interview?
Well, I just want to, the first thing that I want to do is just thank you, Jess, for having me on this
You're so
interview.
welcome.
I think this is it's been such an amazing experience. I was so looking forward to connecting with you and just connecting on this platform and connecting with your audience and to audiences in general. I just feel like it's okay to go through a struggle. Have permission to feel it. Don't repress it. Don't shove it down. Don't stuff it. It's okay. You're going to be okay. It's okay to be in a struggle though. Give yourself permission and allowance to feel when you are in a struggle, and try not to mask it or have debilitating coping strategies where you are numbing yourself. Really just sitting with yourself and being okay in those moments in the here and now is really my biggest takeaway in terms of your own mental health. And the platform that you have, really, and how you present your speakers, Jess, is you're taking away the stigma that's attached to abusive relationships. You're taking away the attachment of stigma to mental health. And that's such a strong message and purpose for your platform and for people of your audience to understand that there is no shame. There is no stigma. We have to be comfortable. And sometimes we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, but letting go of some of this stigma and actually giving yourself permission to feel and ask for help is kind of like what the purpose I feel of your platform and how you allow that for your audience. I think it's imperative.
Thank you. That's exactly why I did it, because I'm 39, and when I first told my parents that I was depressed at age 12, I got told that I was making it up because they didn't want to. It's not that my parents didn't love me, it's they didn't want to deal with it. They didn't understand how to deal with it, and they came from the generation of, we'll just ignore it. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I got to be 36, I went to the doctor and got reshamed again because I finally said I have a problem with anxiety. Maybe nobody thinks I do, but I really think something's not right in my head, because I shouldn't be up and down and I shouldn't be having panic attacks. And I went to the doctor again and they told me it's all in your head. And once you get stabilized off of this depression medicine we're going to put you on, then you won't feel that way anymore. And then you can get in the MRI and your claustrophobia will go away. Because they refuse to give me any kind of sedative to get in the MRI machine because I have a pituitary tumor, which I've had since I was 16, and I'm deathly afraid I've got claustrophobia. And my doctor literally told me I didn't have it, that I was making it up in my head. And this is a medical doctor. And so that kind of went back to, well, I'm 12 again, and now here
Yeah.
I am being told I don't have a problem. So that was my whole motivation, is not to blame anyone, because I never like to blame it. It's truly my doing, if I'm going to take care of myself. But if you don't have that strength in you, it happens all the time that people go in and they're trying to reach out for help and they're like, yeah, whatever, you just want attention. And then you
Right.
hear something bad happens to them. And I've lost people to suicide. And I want you guys to know that you're never alone. And if you feel something's wrong with you, if the first person doesn't listen, go find someone like Michele to listen. Go find someone like myself, because there's always someone out there for everyone to listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
You do first off, reaching out for help is such a big step. It's such an
yeah.
important step. And the person who's a recipient of that product of reaching out, if they don't provide the services that are effective, the person who's seeking out help the likelihood of them seeking out help again is going to
Uh-huh.
be slimmer. It's
Yeah.
slim. So that's why I put out there is to help providers, help service supports and providers, service members to really, when someone's reaching out for help, particularly a victim, to be the most effective. And this book outlines how each genre can do that. So that the seeking out help is so important and needs to be taken very seriously.
Yes, and so for those of you out there, if somebody's seeking help and you don't know how to deal with it, find somebody else to help them, but do not shame them. And if you are a person who has went and tried to get help and you have been shamed, come chat with me or Michele, because I guarantee you there's no shame, only love and answers. We figure out
Absolutely.
stuff over here in my session. So
Yes, yes.
thank you again, Dr. Michele Finnernan, for being here today. I really appreciate your insight and your knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me, Jess. It's awesome to connect with you and your audience on this platform. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Well, there you have it, beautiful souls. Another powerful guest that has taught you how to survive the swim in the toxic waters and break up with your toxic dance partner fear. If you need help trying to find a new dance partner, please reach out to myself or Dr. Michele Finnernan, our guest on our show today, and let us show you how a single 4-letter word can change your whole mindset. And that 4-letter word is love. With love, all things are possible. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dancing in the Toxic Shadows. Until we meet again, this is Jess, Intuitive Angel Healer, sending healing angel vibes. Love and light, everybody. Take care.